In this video, we will be implementing the functionality to return all tasks, but at 20 per time on a page. We'll open up Atom, and if we go to our task controller, and what I'm going to do, just to make things a bit clearer, I'm just going to fold these up. So this was the one that handled the get individual task, and this was a bit of functionality here that returned all completed or incomplete, and this was the one that returned all of the tasks. And then there was the catch-all at the bottom if it wasn't any of them. Just going to minimize that. So what we're going to do here is handle the per 20 per page. So the URL will look like, so it's tasks/page/ and then the page number. So that would be page 1, page 2, page 3, etc. Now that's obviously the prettified URL, and what we'll be using is task.php, and then it'll be page equals 1 or page equals 2 or page equals 3, and that's how we'll be mapping that in the htaccess file. So what we need to look for is the page. So a bit like what we've done here, we looked for the completed, but we're actually going to look for the page. So I'm just going to get rid of them, just tidy that up a bit, and what we're going to do is create another else if. Now what I want to do is put it just before this empty get. So we'll press enter there and just write else if, and then we'll just copy that, paste that in there, and then change this to page. So this is our logic here. So now it's we're going to be handling the page here. The first thing we need to do is handle the server request method, and the page, if we're using the /page/1, we only want to be able to use get requests. So we need to handle if any other request method was used, just to output our standard error response. So if we do the if statement, so it was if, and then it was server, and then it was request, method, and it was equal to get. This is where we're going to be working in, so what we need to do is handle the else, and we need to output our standard response. So we'll just create the response, new response, response, and then we want to response set HTTP status code, and remember this is a 405 error because we only want to handle get requests on this route, so /page should only handle get requests. So this is a request method not allowed. So we need to set the success. Set success to false. And we need to add a message. Of request method not allowed. We need to send it. We need to exit. Okay, so that's our handling of the error there. Okay, so moving on, I'll just create some space here so we can see what we're doing. So within the get, we need to get the page number. So page equals get page. So obviously this is passed in on the task.php/page. So we're getting this number being passed in here, the value. So get rid of that. And now what I need to do is check to see if the passed in value is a valid value for page. So that would be something like make sure it's not blank, so make sure it has a value, but also make sure it's numeric. And if it's neither of them, we need to send a standard response back. So we need to check if the page is blank, or if it's not numeric. And if it is an error, or if it is a non-valid value, we need to set a standard response. So response equals new response, and then response, and we'll send so we need to set the HTTP status code, and this is a 400 error because we've passed in some wrong data, or the client's passed in some wrong data. They may have entered something like page equals test, or some text that's not a valid page number. So we need to handle that. So response set success is false. Response add a message, and the message is page number cannot be blank and must be numeric. And then we need to send and exit. Okay, so that is checking to make sure that the passed in page value is valid, and if it is, we'll move on to the rest of the logic. So we need to decide how many per page we want to send back. So our requirement said 20 per page, so we'll just set this as a solid value here. So limit per page, set that at 20. And now we need to perform some database queries. So with all database queries, we'll do the try and catch. And catch, first one will be PDO exception, call it EX. And we will be handling tasks here, so we may as well build a placeholder for the task as well. Catch task exception. Okay, so what we need to do here is build our standard response, or standard error responses back for these two exceptions. May as well get these out of the way now. So response equals new response. Set HTTP status code, and that is a 500 server error where something's went wrong. Set success, and we need to add a message, and we'll actually here's a task exception, so we need to display the returned message. So AX get message, and we need to send and exit. And we'll just utilize this one, just save a bit of time, paste it in here. We need to get rid of this message because we're going to add one in, which is just failed to get tasks. That's a good catch-all. And then because it's going to be a database sort of error here, we should log it in the error log. Database query error, and then append the exception to that and put it in the PHP error log. So we'll save that. Okay, so that's our exceptions done. Now if we go back to the try statement. So if we think about this, the first thing we need to do is work out how many pages we will be returning. Now, if we do a SQL count on all of the tasks, and then divide that by how many per page, that should give us the amount of pages that we need to display. So if we try and get this value to begin with, so query equals, and this will be, we'll be using the read database connection for this because we are just querying data back, we're not writing at this point. So we'll just use the read DB, and then it is prepare. And then we'll use our SQL, we'll put our SQL statement in here. So select, and then we'll do count how many IDs there are, and we'll give it an alias. Total number of tasks from TBL tasks. So that should return the count of how many tasks is in our table. So if we just execute that, oops, query execute, and we need to fetch obviously this value back. So if we just get this row, because it's only a single row because it's a count query, so if we just say row, and then it is query fetch, and then it is PDO, and then fetch associative array. Okay, so now that we've got the row, we need to get the value. And what we'll do is we'll just make sure that it is an integer that's been returned. So we'll call this tasks count. Yeah, that should be fine. And then what we'll do, we'll cast it as an int val to make sure it's an integer. And then what we'll do is we'll get row, and then obviously the field that we're returning is total number of tasks. So we'll just write that in there, total number of tasks. So that should have assigned, I don't know, say there's 5 tasks. So that should assign 5 to the task count here. So now we need to work out how many pages is needed for this many tasks. So like I say, we need to divide the two together. So we'll call this num of pages, and then we need to do tasks count divided by the limit per page. So what this will do here, you'll probably end up with a decimal value if it doesn't divide into each other perfect. So what we want to do is always round it up. So if we're retrieving 20 per page and there's 21 tasks, we should say there is 2 pages because there's more than 20, so we'll have 1 left over. So we need to say there's 2 pages. So the decimal for that would be 1 point whatever. So we need to say that's 2. So in order to do that, use a function called ceil. And what we do here is ceil and then wrap that calculation within the ceil. So if it's anything greater than 1, so you know, it could be 1.1, it would always round that up to sort of 2. Now that's exactly what we want to do here. So the next thing we need to do is have a look at this and think about it. Now, if we look here at this SQL query, we're counting how many tasks there are that's in the database. Now, you might have no tasks. Now, you can't divide something by 0 because it equals 0. Now, at minimum, we want 1 page displayed. And you're probably thinking, well, why should we display 1 page when there's no tasks to display on that page? Well, the reason is that if you do /pages/1, you should get returned a successful response, but with a sort of a blank tasks array. So you're not getting an error message because it's not an error, you're just literally retrieving nothing. So we need to display the fact that there's no tasks. So in order to do that, we need to say that there's at least 1 page if the task count is 0. So if number of pages is equal to 0, then we'll set number of pages to 1. So that's a quick check there. So if this works out 0, so 0 divided by 20 is 0, there'll always be 1 page. So the next thing we need to do here is validate that the page that's requested is not like a random value. So say there's only 2 pages. If there's, you know, if someone says, well, retrieve page 5, we need to send a response back to say this page is not found. So the way we do that is do an if statement, and then we'll be doing 2 checks here. First of all, there can't be ever as a page 0, it's always page 1, so we need to do that check to make sure it's not page 0. And the other thing we need to do is to make sure that the page, the passed in page, is not greater than the total number of pages. So going back to our example before, if we pass in page 5 but there's only page 2, there's only 2 pages, then we want to show an error message. So the way we do that is, so a page is greater than number of pages, and we'll just build this response now. New response, oops. And then response set HTTP status code, and this is a 404 because you're requesting a page that doesn't exist. And then we'll set success, set that to false, and then we will add a message, and we'll just say page not found. Oops. and then we want to send, then we want to exit. Oops. Page, if the passed in page is greater than number of pages, that's when we get this error message. Or what we need to do is if page is equal to 0. So that handles our errors there. Scroll down again. Now what we need to work out is the offset. So depending on what page we're on, we only want to retrieve results from that row number. So to give an example, page 1 will retrieve all rows from row 1 to 20. And page 2 will retrieve 21 to 40. So we need to work out this offset. So we'll call it offset. And what we're going to do is do something called a ternary operator. Basically a shorthand if statement. So I'll explain it as we sort of create this. So we need to do page equals 1. And then, so all this is doing is, this is if the page is equal to 1, then, that's what the question mark means, then 0, and this means else. So else, and we need to work out here. So let's think about this. We need to do 20 times page minus 1. So because this is a compound statement, we'll wrap this in brackets, and that brackets again. Make sure we get our order right. Yeah, that looks fine. So if the page is equal to 1, so the first page, then we'll start at 0 because we want 0 and above. Otherwise, that's what the colon means. Otherwise, we need to work out what the page is. So say we're on page 2. We need to do page. So 2 minus 1 is 1. And then we need to times the offset. So what we can do here is, instead of hard coding that in there, we already hard coded it up here. So limit per page, and we'll paste that in there. So that's 20. We'll just substitute that for 20. And that is page minus 1. So if it's page 1, we don't have to worry about it. It starts at 0 and calls up to 20. Otherwise, it goes what page we're on. So say we're on page 2. We need minus 1 there, because if we do 2 times 20, that means it starts at 40 for page 2, which is wrong. That's actually page 3. So we need to minus a page. So page minus 1. So page 2 minus 1 is 1. And we'll times that by 20, which gives us 20. So if we do this by 3, so page 3 minus 1, that's 2, times 20, starts at 40. So that's how you work your offset out. So next what we need to do is actually use this to query the database and pull back them rows that's relevant. So we'll just scroll down a bit. We'll create the query. This is again against the read database. We're only reading here. So we'll do a prepare, and we'll create the SQL query like we did to get all tasks on one page basically. So if we do select ID, title, description, deadline, and completed from TBL tasks. First of all, I'm just going to format the date again, just like we have done our previous ones. So date, format, and put the mask in. So that was %d, / month, %year, and then it was %hour, colon, %I, as deadline. Remember to alias it. So I'll just scroll right here because we haven't finished the SQL query. And now what we use here is the limit keyword. And the first parameter that we enter here is PG limit. And next we use offset, and we'll set the offset. So the limit is how many rows to retrieve from the database. So that will be the page limit. So we should be able to pass in 20 there. And then the offset is what row we start at. Now, to begin with, this will be row 0 because we want rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 20. The next one obviously will be 21 up over. So now that we've placeholdered them in there, if we just scroll back and bind the parameters. So query bind param. So the first one was PG offset. Sorry, PG limit. Just thinking about that there. And then we want to bind the limit per page. And then this is type PDO param integer because it's a number. Okay, the next one we need to bind is query bind param, and that was offset. And we're binding the offset here. Oops. And that again was PDO param int. So we're passing in numbers basically. Okay, that's fine. So now we need to execute it. Query execute. And now we need to get the row count, so we can obviously use this data elsewhere. So just like we did last time, row count query row count, and then we need to create a blank task array to store our tasks, any that's retrieved, and then we need to do our while loop. Should iterate over each row to create a task. So row equals query, and then it was fetch, and it was PDO fetch associative array, and then we need to try and create a new task. So task equals new task, and then we'll pass in the columns retrieved by the SQL query up here. So row ID, row title, row description, oops, and then row deadline, row completed. Okay, so that's ID, title, description, deadline completed. ID, title, description, deadline completed. Yeah. So that should attempt to create the row, create the task. So if that fails, obviously we'll catch it here. And then once it's created it, we need to add it to the task array. So task array, and we need to append it. Task, return task as array. So now we need to build up our return data that's going to be sent back in the response. So return data, and we'll just create a blank array to begin with. And then we'll start adding stuff into it. So return data, rows return just like normal, and this will be the row count. Then what we're going to do is something a little bit different here. We're going to do return data and total rows. So we know how many rows there is in total. So you can work out, if there's 20 pages, each with 20 per page, you know there's going to be that many rows. And that's obviously a task count from the top up here when we did the count. So we got that, okay. So return data, and we're going to return the total amount of pages, total pages, and this is number of pages. Obviously we're just reusing all of what we worked out just above here anyway, so we're just returning that. You don't have to, but why not if we've already got the data. The next two pieces of data are if it has a next page, so say we're on page 1 but there can be page 2, you know, we've got enough rows to go on to page 2, we want to set this to true or false. And the same with previous page. If we're on page 2, we need to set has previous page to true because there is a page 1. This allows the client, you know, they can make use of that so they know if there's a next page or not that they can attempt to try. So return data, and this is has next page. Right, so this one's a little bit different because we need to use the ternary operator that we did up here, if I can find it. So instead of writing a big if statement, which you can do, but I find this way quite neat and tidy on one line, we'll actually do that in here. So we'll just write it above here because we're going to use this to set it either true or false. So how we work this out is we need to work out whether the current page is less than the number of pages. So say there's 2 pages in total. If we're on page 1, we are less than that. So that would mean that it does have a next page. So we'll do the, so this is the if statement here. This is if it is, so we'll just wrap this in brackets just to make it a bit tidier. There you go. And we'll just move this and we'll just set this to true. And then we use the colon, paste that in and set it to false. So I'll just explain what we've done here. If statement, so if the passed in page, so if the current page that we're on is less than the total amount of pages, then we know that we have. So then, that's what this is, then set this to true, so it has a next page. Otherwise, so else, set has next page to false. And we'll be doing a similar thing for the previous page as well. So we'll copy this just to save a bit of time, paste it here, and then what we need to do is if the current page is greater than 1, then has previous page, just change these here, is true, otherwise false. So what this is saying is if we're on page 2, so if it's greater than 1, we know that we have a previous page. Obviously we can't get to page 2 unless there is a page 1, so that's your logic there for that. So now that we've got this data, we need to add it to the return. Sorry, we need to add the tasks. Don't forget them, they're important. So return data tasks equals the tasks array. So that'll add the tasks, and then we need to send the response back. So this is the successful response. So response set HTTP status code. This is 200 because successful. Response set success true. Response do we want to be able to cache this? Yes we do, because it's a bit like getting all rows. We should be able to cache it really, so we'll set that, so cache to true, and then we need to set the data. and that's our return data that we've built up here. Okay, and we need to send, and then exit. Okay, we'll just get rid of this white space and save that. Okay, so hope you've stayed with us there, because it has been a little bit different to the rest that we've done. I have introduced some new PHP concepts, shorthand if statements, but you can look that up if you want to. Quite easy to use, it's quite neat and tidy as well. Okay, so we'll just review what we've done just quickly before we test it out. So make sure the page parameter exists. Make sure it's get only. If not, we'll show the error message down here about request method not allowed. Let's get rid of this white space as well. Scroll back up. We'll get the page number, store in a variable. We'll make sure that the page is not blank and it is numeric, otherwise show a standard error response. We'll set the limit per page. We'll then try our database queries. So the first one is to retrieve how many rows there is in the table. That'll allow us to work out how many pages we need. So we retrieve that back. We'll get that value back as an integer. We just cast it as an integer just to make sure that it is a number that we can do a calculation on. We'll look at how many pages it's going to take to display all the results. So we'll do how many tasks there is total divided by how many per page. We'll use the ceil to round up, because it could be 1.2, but we want to display at least 2 pages. We'll then say, well, if there's no rows in the table, we still want to retrieve page 1. We still want to be able to browse to page 1. Even if it shows no results, that is good. So then we'll do a bit of a check here to have a look to make sure that we're not passing in, for example, page 5 when there's only 3 pages exist. We're also stopping people from passing in page 0 because there is no page 0. We'll then work out the offset. The offset allows you to start from a row, so on page 1 would be 0 to 19, for example, and then page 2 would be 20 to 39, that sort of thing. So we work out the offset. We'll then retrieve the tasks in hand with the given offsets and the given limit. For each row, we'll try to create a task. We'll then add some new fields to the data that we send back in the response. For example, total rows and total pages, has next page, has previous page. We'll then add the tasks into the tasks array to return in our response here. If there's an error, then we'll handle it in the task exception or the PDO exception. So what we need to do now is we'll just save that. We need to quickly edit our htaccess file to put the root in for the /pages. So go to htaccess and we need to write our new rule underneath here. So we need to write rule, and then it's tasks /page/ and we want to be able to put a number in. So a bit like what we're doing here, where we had the /tasks/ and then the task ID, we need to put a number in and use that number in the query string. So exactly what we did just above here, it's basically the same thing. So 0 to 9, it's got to be a number and it's got to contain at least one number. And then that maps to controller task.php page. And then exactly what we did up here, we can use the value that's been passed in the query string. So page, and then we normally do 1 because it's the first one here. Then we'll put the last flag there. So we'll save that. Okay, so we'll open up Postman. And then we'll try to browse. So http://localhost port 8888/v1/tasks. Now if we just run this, you can see there's 5 tasks. So now if I do /page/1, so you can still see that there's 5 tasks because we're allowed 20 per page. But you see that we've got some more metadata here. So it doesn't have a next page and there is no previous page because we're on page 1. You can see there's only 1 page and there's 5 rows. And this is how many rows was returned on the page. And then you have the list of tasks. So if we try page 2, you can see there we're getting a 404 error, which is correct. Success is false, page not found, because there is no page 2. There's not enough rows to generate a page 2. So go out to page 1 or page 0, we'll get that error message. Now if we go back to page 1, I'm just going to add some new rows into our database, just to take you over the 1 page that we've got now. So if you bear with us, I'll fast forward through this bit because we're just adding in new rows. You can do this in your own time. Okay, so I've added them new rows. Page 1, so if I just get that, you can see that there's total rows is 37, so there's 37 rows now. So what we should get is 2 pages, so total page is 2. So now if we browse to the second page, we'll get 17, which is what's left over. And you can see I just created some test data here. It's just rubbish really, it is all the same, just to speed it up. But you can see there that the pages is now working, so it has previous page because we're on page 2. But it doesn't have a next page because we're on page 2. And basically that's the total pages. Go back to page 1, has next page, true, has previous page, false. So now that I've done that, the next part is actually creating a task. So we'll go on to that in the next video.